So if you could just tell me, your name, and position and the institution you work for.
My name is Sue Pilkilton. I'm the executive director of the Hellen Keller Birthplace, located in Tuscumbia, Alabama.
Okay. And could you give us a little information about your educational background, like any, experience you have or anything like that?
Basically, I started to work here at the age of 14. My father, his best friend, was the curator, and she asked if I would like to work in the gift shop. So my journey actually started when I was 14. And then we went into, I worked in the gift shop, and then I became a docent for several years, and then I became the administrative assistant. Then later in the early 80s, I became the executive director.
Okay. And did you ever, work anywhere else related to history or?
No, I fell in love with this place on a Sunday afternoon when our English teacher at Desher High School, we were studying the miracle worker. And she said, if you tour the Hellen Keller Birthplace and bring back your ticket, then I will give you 100 extra points. So at that time, I came up on a Sunday. It was in April, a beautiful Sunday afternoon. And as I walked the grounds and heard the story and everything about Hellen Keller, I just fell in love with it. And so I've had several other opportunities, but I've chosen not to go elsewhere. I've been here fixing to be going into my 50th year.
Wow, that's really great. So could you explain a little bit about maybe the different positions at the birthplace and, how your job fits into all the things that go on?
Well, basically, we run on a very small budget. We're not state or federally owned or funded. So therefore, we have to rely on the admission that is charged here for the Keller home. I have 7 hostesses or docents, as you might call them, and 1 maintenance man and myself. I'm in charge of the daily operations, the financial part of it. Really, I have to do it all because we don't have the funds to have other employees to do the work.
Right. Okay. Um, and could you talk a little bit about maybe like other people in the community, or you said you had a board meeting, so you have a board. Who else, is kind of involved in this since it's, such a small operation?
Well, we have a 11-member board, which is the Hellen Keller Birthplace Foundation. When it first started, or I guess the establishment, in 1954, the city of Tuscumbia bought the home from the family, and at that time they appointed a board. I think it was a 5-member board, and they told them, we've purchased it. Now it's up to you to maintain and keep it up. Don't come to us for money, financial obligations, because we don't have it. So at that time, the board took it very seriously, and we've never asked the city for anything. They've been great partners through the years, but we have basically ran the Keller home by ourselves. We have 11 board members now, and we meet quarterly. And of course, if I have to call an emergency board meeting, they're always willing to come and meet.
And so just, generally, like what kind of people, is it just anybody and everybody who's on that, or, people with a vested interest, or people with,
Well,
history
we have
experience?
a very diverse board, mainly business, people in business. We have a banker. We have a gentleman that was the director of the Tuscumbia Utilities Department for many years. We have Dr. Gail Satchel, the superintendent of Colbert County Schools. We have another gentleman which lives in Florence. He's the only one that we always talk about crossing the river, but Russ Darracott, he was a student at UNA, and I became very close with him on a project that UNA was doing for us. They were designing our website. And I noticed that Russ had a very love for history and for Hellen Keller. And so I talked to the board, and they invited him to come on as one of our board members. So basically, we have a lot of, they're all business-minded people.
Right. Okay. So you've talked a little bit about, some of the challenges with funding. What would you consider the most challenging part of your job?
Trying to make ends meet. I always try to apply for grants when they are available. We really run a tight ship here as far as finances. The state of Alabama, of course, we don't get any funding from them, but through the Colbert County Tourism and Convention Bureau, I'm able to co-op with them when we do ads for magazines like Southern Living, the Alabama Vacation Guide. So by being able to co-op with them, that allows us to do more as far as advertising and promoting. And that is probably our biggest obstacle right there.
Right. And you said you've also done collaborations with UNA students for your website too. Are there any other kind of community partnerships that help you kind of get around the things that might otherwise be really expensive like that?
Well, we always look for like civic clubs to help us, and volunteer, like the Lions Club. In the summertime, the Lions, they come up and help with the Miracle Worker play. They sell the programs for us. They help us park cars. So we're always looking for avenues for people to volunteer and get their hours in.
Right. So, the Miracle Worker play is something that's fairly unique as far as, most house museums, aren't necessarily, have such a large, annual theatrical production. Could you talk a little bit about that? Maybe how many people come, or
Last year we had,
anything like that?
it normally runs for 6 weeks. Usually the 1st of June through the middle of July on Friday and Saturday evenings. Last year we had, I think it was 4,200 in the 6 weeks. People from all over the world come each year. And I will have to say that 90%, maybe 95% of our visitors during the summer for the play are out of state. We always take for granted our local museums and think that they'll always be here, and we'll visit them at another time, and we go elsewhere.
Right. Okay. And could you explain just a little bit, maybe for those who aren't as familiar, what the Miracle Worker is, and what a little more about what the birthplace is all about?
Well, about a few years ago, I had the privilege of going to visit William Gibson. He is the playwright for The Miracle Worker. And I was talking to him about The Miracle Worker, and I said, how did you come about writing this awesome production? And he said, well, to be honest with you, it was like the flip side of a hit record. I never thought that The Miracle Worker would do anything. He said, but that's all people think I ever did was write The Miracle Worker. And he said, but I wrote it out of her book, The Story of My Life. And he got up, went into his library, came back, and handed me the original Story of My Life that Hellen Keller wrote. And he said, take this back to the museum. He said, because when I die, my family will just throw it in the dumpster, and they won't care. So he based The Miracle Worker on her life, the early life of Hellen Keller, when Anne Sullivan first arrived here in Tuscumbia, which we still have the depot located on 5th Street in Tuscumbia, where Anne Sullivan arrived. And when Anne Sullivan arrived, of course, The Miracle Worker, it talks about the obstacles she had in getting Helen to relate to her or to trust her. And then finally, she realized that in order to get control of Helen, which was an unruly child, that she would have to take her away from her family. So at that point, they put her in the carriage and drove her all around the plantation, which was 640 acres. Helen thought she was going far away, but she was actually just coming next door to the cottage. And so they stayed there for 2 weeks. Then they brought her back into the house. And very soon she realized she was in the presence of her mother and daddy. And she started acting up, eating out of their plates, throwing food. So Anne Sullivan took her out to the water pump and began to pump water over her hand and spelling in her hand the word water. And finally, it was like her mind just opened up and she realized that the coolness that was running over her hand was what Anne Sullivan was spelling and was water. And they said that day she learned 30 words.
That's great. So, with the water pump is always a big focal point, when people visit the birthplace, and, you have, thousands of visitors a year, it sounds like. So how do you manage, all that traffic coming through? Because, even though it's may not seem like that many people, it's a lot for, a little house in
For
Tuscumbia.
a house.
So
Yeah. Well, I'll put it this way. The Saturday before we closed uh, in March, which would have been March the 14th, we had 132 visitors that day on a Saturday in the sprinkling rain to walk through the doors of the Hellen Keller Birthplace. We averaged around 35 to 40,000 visitors a year, and then over 4,000 for the Miracle Worker play. So, most people think that it's a small museum and we don't have much traffic, but we're probably, besides the Space and Rocket Center, we're probably the most well visited museum in the state of Alabama, in North Alabama, I will say. But, with my hostesses giving tours, they tried to do a hands-on tour. And that's something that once the governor releases us to go back to opening, we will have to come up with a plan of doing something differently, at least for a while.
right. So, one of the things that we studied a lot when we talked about, house museums, and other like small historical sites, was, sometimes it can be challenging, especially when your docents, or you call them hostesses, are, volunteers a lot of the time. Like they may want to tell certain stories more than others. So how do you handle, training them or recruiting, or all that stuff?
Basically, my ladies are retired. They just want a day or two. They call it fun money. We do pay our hostesses. We don't pay them that much, but they do make $10 an hour. So for retirees, that's fun money to them. But they have to read. They have to come and shadow the other hostesses. And there's been many a times that people have come, and after going through a few days of training and seeing how, it's hard work because you're on your feet all the time, you're talking all the time. They've decided that it wasn't for them. But I have 7 very dedicated ladies that's been with me for a long time, and I'm very fortunate. But it's really a hands-on learning. Every hostess tells the story a little differently. And all the hostesses don't take as much time. Some take a long time, some takes a shorter time. But I always want them to leave, the visitors to leave, to say that they had a wonderful experience, because my docents slash hostesses, they are the most important value as far as advertising that I could ever have.
Right. Okay. And then, most of the places we visited as well, there's been, either a legacy of slavery or other, potentially controversial issues. And I know, um, Captain Keller, I think, he was participated in the Civil War. Um, is there any way that you guys have, kind of confronted that, or how is it presented in the museum?
Well, Captain Keller was a member of the Confederate Cavalry. He had servants on this property. By then, the slaves were freed. Viney and her family lived here, and they talk about her in the play, of course. We don't shy away from the fact that she was a servant. I don't know how much they were paid. I don't know if they're living here helped with their salary. I really don't know that. But, that's just part of history that we have to face. But Captain Keller did have servants because they had a 640-acre cotton plantation. Now, whether they were all black that lived here to help with the crops, I'm not sure.
Okay. All right. So going back to some other more personal questions, what do you think is your favorite part of your job, or what do you find the most rewarding?
I think the most rewarding part of my job is when I see parents come through the home with a child that's deaf or blind or both, or a parent that's just found out that their child has vision problems, hearing problems, that they come here for hope and inspiration. And we have so many of that. And I think that is the greatest gratitude that I would have, is to see that we do make a difference, and that Hellen Keller's legacy is still being, today through the Lions Club. In 1925, she asked the Lions to become the Knights for the Blind, and they took on that challenge. So today, when you see them out selling brooms and mops and collecting eyeglasses, that's because of Hellen Keller. So her work is still being done today, and I think that's awesome.
Yeah, that's great. Are there any professional resources that are really important in helping you do your job? Some of the people we've talked to are members of, historical societies, or they go to conferences or other things like that. Or is there
I'm
something you wish existed that you?
Well, I'm very involved. I'm on the tourism board for the state of Alabama, and I'm also on the Alabama Mountain Lakes board, and I'm on the Colbert County Tourism Board. And I go to a lot of conferences, a lot of trade shows. We all work together, promoting and knowing that what we have is very important. And that's what I like. I go to whatever I need to as far as to learn. We have a lot of classes that help us in tourism. And a lot of times it's very stressful. A lot of people may think that our jobs are just, fun and game, but it certainly isn't that. We have a lot of obligations, and we have to take advantage of when the state puts on seminars to go to those things. And that's how I work here.
Okay. And then just probably our final question, what advice would you give, to other students who are interested in history, or anyone who might be interested in a similar kind of career to yours?
First of all, you got to love what you do. No matter what you go into, whatever field you go into, you have to have a love for your job. You can't go in there thinking it's a paycheck, because you'll always be trying to find somewhere else to go. I know that both of my daughters are teachers, and one teaches first grade and one teaches third grade, and they are at different parts of the state. But I have found that there are teachers, and then there are teachers that have been called to teach. So in any profession, you've got to have a love and dedication, especially if you go into tourism.
All right. Well, I think unless there's anything else you'd like to share, that's probably enough for me. Or if you'd like to talk about some of the new challenges you faced, with the all the what's going on right now with the shutdown, if you want to talk about that a little bit, that would be fine.
Well, I will say after listening to the governor today, we have got to remain closed. Uh, I went back and looked. Uh, we had 55 school groups down on the calendar from March to the end of May. And after spring break, we would have probably booked another 30 to 40 school groups. Uh, and to me, not only our loss in revenue, but for the students that were coming, that is a great loss because a lot of them will probably never get the opportunity to visit Hellen Keller Birthplace. And, they study Hellen Keller in school. It's a big deal to them, fourth grade especially. My youngest daughter teaches first grade in Tuscaloosa, and they do a whole chapter on Hellen Keller, and she brings in seeing eye dogs. They dip cotton in different fragrances, and the children are blindfolded. They have Braille. They have sign language. They learn sign language. So much is brought into that. And I know that her class, they were bringing 11 classes this year from Tuscaloosa, just her school. And those children were so disappointed. So the challenge is, not only us as far as revenue, but to think that people, even travelers, may never pass this way again and not get to experience the birthplace is really sad to me.
Yeah. What percentage of your business would you say school groups make up?
I would say on a financial part of it, I know that just the 3 months of what we had on the books, and that's not counting what we would have booked on into May, it's about $25,000 in revenue, and that's just in admission. That's not counting gift shop. So we've taken a big blow as far as this virus is concerned.
Sure. Well, yeah, unless you want to tell me anything else, about whatever it is you
We
do.
are looking forward to the Miracle Worker play. We had a board meeting yesterday. We will not be able to start on June the 5th like planned. This will be a short season for us if all goes well. We will start June the 26th, the day before Helen's 140th birthday. And then we will close out on July the 11th. That was our original closing date. So we will only have 3 weekends for the Miracle Worker this year, if all goes well.
Okay. All right. Well, I certainly recommend that everybody come see y'all. But yeah, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to me.
Well, thank you so much for thinking of us, and stay safe. God bless, and maybe we'll see you this summer.
All right. You too. Thank you, Miss Sue.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.